except Della, would you unmute yourself, please?
I'm
Great.
unmuted.
Okay, and let me spotlight you. And there you are. And this is Della Wells. She's our honored, very much honored speaker for today. She's a self-taught artist who began drawing and painting in earnest at the age of 42. Her creative process stems primarily from her personal experience, embellished through the art of storytelling into visual work. Her work's been written about and has appeared in several publications. In 2011, an award-winning play that was inspired by her life, Don't Tell Me I Can't Fly, debuted in Milwaukee and has been performed in many venues. Della illustrated a children's book, The Electric Train by Nanci Mortimer. She had also exhibited extensively in galleries and museums. Her work is in over 100 private, corporate, and museum collections, including Northwestern Mutual Insurance, Milwaukee Bucks, and the Wright Museum of Art. Her dolls, cards, and collages are currently sold at the Smithsonian's National African Museum of History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Her accomplishments are far too extensive to go into here, but if you go to the CAA website, which is in the chat, you can find a link for more details about her exhibition history. And she has, among other wonderful things, created a, sorry, I'm getting rid of a whole lot of extra stuff on my screen here. She has created an introductory video, which I will show you now. And we'll tell you a little bit more about her.
It wasn't until later in my life that I discovered my artistic voice. As a young woman, I was very angry and depressed. Learning about other people's stories helped me to heal. I realized that I was interested in other people's lives, and learning their stories made me a more compassionate person. I created Mammal Land. The Mammal Land women take care of each other. And they are warriors through the sexism, racism, and folks just plain messing with you. In this land, Black women rule. I wanted to become a writer to help counter my dysfunctional upbringing. I can shape each element of a story, fairy tales, history. I am Della Wells, and all my life I've been trying to seek my own truth.
Thank you, Della, for that. And now we will give you a chance to show us your work.
Okay, and I wanted to say that a video was the idea of filmmaker Ruben Whitmore, who's a filmmaker, here, and it was put together. One of the people put it together was Black Box Videos. So I'm gonna start, but I'm gonna start talking about, before I get into the artwork, about my journey to become an artist. I grew up in Milwaukee in the 1950s and 60s, and I grew up at a time, I know in the 50s, where the family was idyllic. It was the American dream. Popular TV shows were Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and other shows. And America was idyllic. At least that's what I was told as a child. And it was very confusing for me because I grew up in Milwaukee, and my mother's from North Carolina. My father was from Baltimore. And I didn't have an idyllic, family life. My mother suffered from schizophrenia. So for 19 years, she went, untreated. And, you know, and I grew up with a lot of books. There were art books, and I was really into fairy tales because, everything was happily ever after until I realized, later that the lot, Prince Charming, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, and people went through a lot of stuff. And also at the same time, I grew up, during the civil rights, movements of the 50s, then the Black Power, power movement, and all these shape what I wanted, shape what I'm doing now as an artist. And I will tell you, I always knew how to draw. I actually sold my first piece of art when I was 13 years old. But I'm gonna be honest with you, as far as me doing art, it really wasn't my thing. I remember when I was in junior high, seventh and eighth grade, my art teacher, Mr. Caston, I thought he was weird as I don't know what. He used to say, draw beautiful cockroaches, draw beautiful cockroaches. And he would bring cow skulls in for us to draw. And in my 12 and 13-year-old and 14-year-old mind, I said, this man is crazy. Why would I want to do that? And my second art teacher in high school, he was Mr. Crawford. And Mr. Crawford was also the basketball coach. And at the time, the school I went to was Lincoln Junior Senior High, which is now known as Lincoln Middle School for the Arts. He was also the basketball coach. And all the kids that knew how to draw, he'll let us work on stuff that we want because he wanted to win prizes like the basketball coach. But that was basically my art experience. And then at age 18, I got involved with a gallery in Milwaukee called Gallery Toward the Black Aesthetics. And it was the first time that I found out about African American artists, but it was also the first time that I learned about women artists. Because prior to that, it never occurred to me that other people made art besides, white males. So I functioned as various roles there. I sometimes drew, but I really wasn't into art. And this is important because I really didn't seriously start making art till I was 42 years old. And I met a lot of artists. And one of the artists I met was Evelyn Patricia Terry, and this is important. So fast forward when I was 42, when I was in my late 30s, I had to make a career change, and I was going to be a psychologist, and I was taking all these academic courses at Milwaukee Area Technical College. And my advisor, who was also my history teacher, advised me to take an art survey course. I said, I know a little bit about art. So to make a long story short, I had to write a paper, and we had to write a paper on artists. And at the time, because I was not a traditional age student, I would write papers on subjects that probably normal students did not want to write. And the person I wanted to write on an African American artist. I also want to write on a Milwaukee artist. And I decided to write an Evelyn Patricia Terry because I know most people are going to write about Picasso, Andy Warhol, Van Gogh, and that's what most people did. I called Evelyn up and asked her, did she remember me? She says, yes, and you're an artist. And I was thinking, you're out of your mind. I'm not an artist, okay? And I was going to do it at the age now. I am now. I just turned 70, but I was going to paint, flowers and houses for some reason. But anyway, she egged me on for 3 years trying to get me to do art. And then I transferred over to University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, where I was going to be a psychologist. I was majoring in sociology. I was doing a minor in African American studies and getting a certificate in women's studies. Why this is important is because that's a lot what's influenced my work. So Evelyn for 2 years was trying to get me to create art. And I said, I would tell her no. And then she invited me to a show. that she and this other artist, Munir Buckadine, and the whole show was on which she did Haitian dolls and he did a Dinka symbols. And you may not believe this, but a voice told me to go make art. So I told Evelyn, I'm ready to make art. 2 weeks later, I went in the studio and I did 2 pastels and a model print. And I never did them before in my life. And they turned out. And actually, it was very therapeutic for me to do the art because one of the reasons I had to make a career change is the fact I got injured on my job. So I started making images, and Evelyn told me if I get 50 pieces of work, she'll get me a show. I just started working. And she said to her, she told me later, she said, oh no, I have to get her a show. But I got my first 2 shows on my own. So I started out doing pastels. My work was always women's based. And how I got into collage was I was doing a show with another artist. Her name was Beverly Noons Ramsey. And she would do, collage and paperwork. And I was really fascinated with it because really two of my favorite artists did collages, Romar Bearden and Matisse. So I did my first 2 collages. At the time I was at this gallery, I was represented by a gallery named David Barnett in Milwaukee. And I remember when I did my first 2 collages, somebody went and told me they didn't think it was my strongest work. Um, David Barnett put the collage on for the exhibition card, and they had 6 buyers for the work that wanted the collage. And one of the buyers who wanted to get the piece was the woman that owned the company American Girl. So, I started doing the collages, and I'm really fascinated with collages, and I got an unconventional way of doing them. Number one, when I start my collages, I do not allow myself to get any other materials. What I always have, the only thing I can get is glue. I don't collect shades of blue or colors and stuff. I actually look and read the magazines as I do them. And so, because this helps me stimulate, what I want to create. And I'm going to tell you about 97% of the time, I do not think of, do not know what I'm going to do. But sometimes I have specific, ideas, and usually, it's stuff that's happening in my life. Now, what's been happening recently, I've been responding to what's been happening politically, COVID and other things. And this is one of the pieces that I did in 2020. And it's actually response to COVID and Black Lives Matter and a lot of things that was happening. And this piece is called Our Ancestors Remind Us That We Will Survive This America. And the reason I did this piece, because being an African American, being a woman, I realized that we have survived a lot. We just survived slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and we have survived. And I truly believe that we were going to survive this too. And a lot in my collages too, I use references to the past. I may use references to the future. I use a lot of symbolisms in my work. And one thing that I do in my complex collages, I have a chicken in my work, and I'll tell you my chicken story. And the reason I do a chicken, as I told you earlier, that my father was from Baltimore, my mother's from North Carolina, and she lived part of her life on a farm. So when they came to Milwaukee in 1950, my father, when he got paid, he would bring I and my siblings a treat. Sometimes it would be donuts, bologna sandwiches, liverwurst. We'd be real happy. One time we got real mad because he brought lettuce and tomato sandwiches. We didn't want that. But this particular day, he brought a chicken. And I think I may have been about 7 or 8 years old. And I was really excited because I thought daddy brought a pet. And no, that wasn't the case. My mother took the chicken, wrung that chicken neck right in front of me. And I was horrified. I screamed. I went and hid under their bed. And guess what we had for dinner that night? And that was a shock to me because I didn't know things had to die so we can have food to eat. And so that was my first truth and my first fear that I learned in life. So the women in my work, which I call Mambos, high priestess of themselves, they take care of their fears and truth. So the chicken represent fears and truth. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so, you know, this is called Jarina's house. And and my artwork takes place in this land, as I said, called Mammal Land. And it did say in my video where Black women rule. And if you see interiors or houses in my work, what they represent is our spiritual selves. And as you can see that there's a chicken here holding the American flag. I put the American flag in there, a lot of my pieces, because, America has not been good to Black people, but at the same token, Black people and others, women, um, Chinese, Chinese, Native Americans, Latinos, workers have, Irish immigrants have forced America to live up to what is ideal, is dream, is promise. So you see, my, chicken there. And one of my influences too is quilts. My mother used to quilt, and I'm really fascinated how people, particularly women, made quilts and made stuff out of nothing. And this is Jarina's house, and sometimes I just use the name. This is her spiritual, this is her spiritual house. We can go to the next slide if you like. Okay, and this one is again Black Lives Matter, the old Civil Rights Matter influences. And this is I say it's my freedom day. And this is particularly, another young sister, again, is saying, you're going to respect me as a Black woman, you're going to respect me as a woman. And I, like I said, I use different symbolism in my work. If you see watermelons in my work, it's really referring to stereotypes because, often stereotypes are based in truth. White people do eat watermelon, so a lot of other people. But for example, Jewish people were bankers, and then that was a truth. But then they try to twist it and use it against them. Also, if you see apples in my work, is referring to the first sin, how women get blamed for everything. Um, like in Adam and Eve, it was Adam, because he can, lusting after Eve as her charms, to do wrong, and which is a lie. But we're gonna grab hold of that lie and make you face the truth. Now the records up there is because it's reference, and I refer a lot of times also to I'll refer to American history, world history, art history in my work, even my own personal history. And the records really um, reflect to my own personal history because I grew up with a lot of records and my father had a lot of records. And I used to play records, when I was a child and teenage, play my father's records, and they were like Dinah Ross, Washington. He had a lot of jazz, and I used to play it, and that was one of the good things that I liked in my childhood. And again, you see the flag. If you see butterflies in my work, and which you will see in some, that means transformation of the soul, because I grew up a very angry young young woman, because I was mad because my parents weren't like Ward and Beaver Cleaver. Then I realized when I got older and I started meeting other people and started learning other people's stories, that most people didn't have Ward and board and June Cleaver for parents. And actually, my son told me once too that he wished I was more like June Cleaver. And I told him, is nobody going to be mopping no floors in no high heels or dress in pearls? But we can go on to the next one. We can go on to the next one. Okay. And this again, this piece is called Sister, We Must Seek Freedom on This Path. And this again, because I think for me, that would help me to get over being so angry and mad at my parents was basically was other women, you know. And I look at my work as, being hopeful. And I like putting my, chickens, I like them wearing, tennis shoes. I like them, on wheels. And you also in my work, all what you will see that, I like to have women carry something in their hands. And it's to me, that's very important because you got to bring something to to the table. And sometimes I tear to pieces. I cut the pieces. Um, I love putting quilts into pieces. And if you see people in the background or in the windows, it's because they're our ancestors. And when I was majoring in African American studies, I took a course in African religion, and they talked about in some African religion why your ancestors are important, and we all are extension of our ancestors. And I think that's very important because I thought about my generation. I'm a boomer, and how we kept complaining about the older generation that they didn't do this. Well, now they complain about, complain about us, boomers. But we all are products of our, generation. And I like to think that each generation moved forward. Let's go to the next one, please. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. And a lot of things influence my work. Politics, um, going, going to the store, meeting people. This is called, Did You Invite Mike Pence's Fly to Come Visit Us? And I was looking at, the vice presidential debates, and like other people, we noticed that it was was a fly. And at the top there, there is a fly there. And she's looking up, and it's sort of like when the fly landed on Mike Pence's head and everybody kept staring, I kept staring at it. I kept thinking about COVID, America's problems, what we're going through. And, this is just making reference to that. Um, Again, you see the chicken. I like, the quilts. Um, and I'm, there is a reference when they talk about marches. I'm really talking about all, the civil rights marches, the women's marches, workers, marches. And that's one of the great things that I think about America. And I think we forget, I think we forget that a lot of things that we have today is because, people protest it. But yeah, I kind of like playing satire. We can go to the next one. And satire is very important in my work. Now, the young sister, I started thinking about, you know, young Black women. Actually, I think a lot about young women, period, and what we have to go through. And particularly, I thought about my niece, and I used to babysit my niece. My niece should be 19 this year. And I really didn't pay that much attention to babies. And I started paying attention to, girls. And actually, we come in here as young women, we come in, we want to rock and, take over. One of my great nieces, she's a twin, and her brother's not, and they're very assertive. And then something happened to girls when they start, and it happened to me when you get, you start getting into your preteens and stuff. a lot of girls pull back. And I noticed that about my niece. And then it made me realize that I did it. And I said a lot of young girls did it. So this is a homage to young to young women, that I want them to know that they are powerful. And again, the ancestors are in the back. They're powerful, and I think young women need to hear that. And it's really kind of sad for me to see us not being we don't want to society do not want young girls to be yourself. They want you supposed to be pretty. um I grew up with brothers that were real smart. They weren't, I didn't want to be smart because they hated my brothers. I didn't want people to hate me. That's one good thing about getting older. When I started getting in my 30s and 40s, I really didn't care what anybody think. But this is homage, to the young girl. And and when she cared, the heart is her soul. And I think we should nourish young women and start telling young women that they are powerful warriors. And I like to think of my women as being warriors. We can go on to the next one. And this one again, I did this one, and this year. And this one is called "Yes, Sister, These Are the Stars of Freedom." And and it's really referencing again, and that's one thing I think that make this country beautiful. We're not perfect, okay? United States is not a perfect country, but there's always people there to make it better. And I think I think that's important. And I think a lot of times, we we forget that, and there's a lot of reference that we want to go back to the good old days. And then I realized in my old age that actually the good old days a lot of times weren't that good when you were going through them. But you know, here's an older woman letting this young woman, young girl know that, these are the stars of freedom, and they could be, it could be hers, despite what the stereotypes are saying out there. And she can piece her life together, piece her life together. And again, you see the ancestors and in the background. And if you see flowers in that in the work, it's really your soul blooming. And I met so many people, um, you know, met so many people, men and women, where their souls weren't blooming. And I feel if we would allow people's souls to bloom and truly be who they I think we'd be a much happier world. And I think a lot of, for me, lot of hate and anger comes from not, not really allowing people to be, who we are, who we, can be. It's all about, suppressing, other people, regardless what the reason. And a lot of my images come from, right now, television. It could be something happens to me. A good example is, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. A good example is, and I love her dearly. One of my brother's wife, his mother, every time she's, would see me, she always had a criticism or something negative to say. And so I did this one piece, and because if I was younger, I probably would have told her off. But I make art. I don't get mad anymore. I just make art. It's art about the situation. So I did a piece about her, and the piece was, again, in a house, somebody's spiritual house, and this one of the women was giving another woman a purse, and the name of the piece was "Take Your Purse and Go Home, Miss Betty." And so anyway, I had a solo show at the Charles Alice Museum, and the piece was there, and Betty was there. And I was thinking, oh my God, I hope she don't ask me what this piece means, because her name was in the piece, and I just knew, that she was going to ask, but she didn't. It went right over her head like everything else. And I was really happy I didn't explain. but a lot of things that make, it comes from, you know, a lot of things come from things that happen personally in my life. Um, Stuff that I see on TV, or I may, get inspired by by a conversation. I talk a lot, with my friends and other people. So I pull, inspiration. And when I, look for materials when I do my work too, I buy stuff, people give me stuff, and I find stuff on the street. I don't do that anymore since COVID. And sometimes my great grandchildren and oh, somebody said they did too. So my grandchildren and my nieces and nephews, they go find stuff. They say, "Look, grandma, look, auntie, there, you can make art out of, art out of this." Only my only granddaughter, she's the only one that wasn't with the program. She told me quit picking stuff up. It was embarrassing her. So, but we can go to the next image if you don't, if you don't mind. But it's, but I like picking stuff up. I hope one day out of COVID that I could do it again, because it's actually more fun out of the stuff that I find. And actually, I was walking down the street and I wanted to pick this up, but I didn't because of COVID. And it was some plastic oval thing, and I kept thinking this will make great lashes. So, you know, I get inspired. Also, I guess I should tell you too, if you see teacups in my work, that's really referencing to, back in the day, 40s, 50s, beyond that, even in the 60s, that Black women would have tea parties, you know, would have tea parties, and all these tea parties, they'd be planning political movements. They'd be planning, for their for the community. And represents power. But I like doing it art, and I love I love doing collages. and and I'm gonna tell you, when I do my collages, I do not necessarily specifically look for images. One of the first thing, I don't look and see, oh yeah, I need a chicken. What I look for, the same thing. If I'm painting or doing a pastel, I look for colors. I look for textures. Um, when I do work, particularly when I do workshops with kids, I like I in fact, when I do collage workshop, particularly with kids, I won't let the kids cut out a face and glue it down. I'll tell them if they use a face, they only can use different parts of face to make a new face. And that's only because I want to, see new images. And I think that's very important, because a lot of people think collage is just tearing stuff up and gluing it down. It's not. It's the same thing you do in painting. You still got to think about textures, shading, lighting, and so forth. So I think the same way. I think of collage, you're painting, but you're doing it with with paper. And I think it's, I think that's, really, great. That's one of the great things about doing collages, is taking old things and making something new. And that's something that I've learned. People have taught, you take a bad situation out of your life and you make something new and beautiful. And I think, doing collage is really powerful. Somebody said they like the chicken in a teacup. Yeah, I like putting chickens in the teacups. I think that's a great place to hang out. But does anybody have any questions that they want to ask?
I do. I do have a question.
Okay.
Um, so the chicken, you saw your mother wring the chicken's neck, and then you realized that chickens are, dead animals, or how we eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not totally clear on what the symbol of the chicken is in your work, and it's so
Well, that was one of the first truths that I've learned in life. you don't think about death. You don't think about things dying. And that was also a fear when you're a kid. Um, a lot of things, particularly when I look at my, my young nieces and nephew, my grandchildren, my friends' children, I realized how innocent and naive I was. I thought everything was a fairy tale. I don't know if I would have ate anything if I knew that this chicken had to die. Okay. I didn't know, and I guess you could say thing with plants. I thought food came just like it was, nice little packages. And I think we think the same thing when we grow up too. We start thinking, we assume that even when we talk about freedom in America, that it's already there. It's nice. People died, people fought for it. And I think we forget about a lot of those facts. And I think that's sometimes why some of us Americans, we become so self-absorbed with ourselves, because we really don't, recognize, there's a lot of things that have to, that give up their life or give up their power so we can have certain things. And this was a reality. And and some people say it's a necessary reality, and it is. And you can even see that in the animal world. The lion kills another living animal, kills the deer. And to me, that's tragic. And it makes me not take life, for granted.
Right.
I don't
Thank
know if
you.
that
That's
is,
great.
I,
That's great.
huh?
That's wonderful. It's about making assumptions in a sense.
Yeah,
Not
because
making
we take a lot of stuff for granted. We don't think one thing I think that we as Americans, we we take a lot of things for granted. We don't recognize a lot of people sacrifice, or they lost lives, or even it's stuff that we buy in the store. There's some people that are working for little or nothing so we can have cheap goods. And I think we should, start thinking about things differently, and its effect. But sorry about that. But that's why I think it's important. It's important. And I think for us to really appreciate that, I think we need to really, think about those things. And it's easy to go accuse people, of this and that. And I was talking to this young artist the other day, and I was talking to her about, you know, when we talk about generations, we act like there's only 3 generations that are alive right now. The boomers, millennials, and Generation Z. I said, there's other generations are alive, and but we're so hung up, what the media, what we think, life is. And I think we need to start looking at things.
I have
Are
a
there any?
technical, yeah, I have a technical question. Love, love, love your work. And I also love Bearden, Romero Bearden. I remember when I was in art school, I looked at his work and thought, he could never do that. How does he do that? And then, of course, I fell in love with Faith Ringgold. And I'm just wondering 2 things. One, how has their influence stuck with you? And secondly, what kind of substrate are you using for your work? What is it, paper? Are you using only paper or canvas? And what kind of paper?
Okay, I'm using a bunch of stuff. Okay, I'm using magazines, but I'm also using art papers, um, handmade papers, fabric, found objects. I may use bottle caps, um, anything, anything. I mean, I didn't have one. I mean, I put bottle caps on collages, and I generally do them on, 3 types of surfaces, canvas board, um, you know, masonite and I do use masonite because Romar Burton used masonite, and I use heavy gauge. Some of them I use heavy gauge Arches watercolor paper. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And how and talk about a little bit about Romare Bearden and Faith Ringgold and how these are the two.
Okay. Okay. Romar Bearden. Okay. As I had said earlier, I didn't know that African Americans made art or women made art. Romar Bearden was one of the first artists that I learned about, and I at the gallery toward the Black aesthetics, and they had books on African American artists, and there's a book. It was, I think it's called Black Art, written by Samela Lewis and Ruth Waddy. That's where I found about him, learned about Romare, and when I think about Romare Bearden's work, I think about jazz and music. When I first started out, I would do all my artwork to music. Now I don't, but I think I'm gonna start back again because I like that. But it was like music. And I learned about Faith Ringgold some years later. And I started reading about how she started doing quilts. And
Yeah.
she started doing quilts because she wanted to do museums and she couldn't afford the shipping. And I liked the fact that she told stories, stories in a quilt. And I also like the fact about Faith Ringgold because she was one of the pioneers, not only for African American artists, but for, women's, women artists as well. And I remember reading about her in this, in the 60s and 70s, where she and Black artists were protesting to get into the museums. And when they decided to let Black people in, they let the Black men in, but they didn't let the Black women in. So she had to go protest with the white women to get into art. It was to get into the museums. It was the same thing with getting the vote. They let Black men vote first. And I got to meet her a couple of times, and she knows, Evelyn Terry, one of the artists I met with, but it's very influential. And she helps, it's been other women artists that have helped me. And are there any other questions? Was there anything else?
Yes.
Anybody,
Yes, I'm just wondering what the title is of the piece that's up right now. Most of the other ones had titles and this one doesn't.
Yeah, it did. The title was, was up there, and I can't remember right now. Let me go look, because the title was up there.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna look. Oh, okay. Oh, well, let's show my other work, because I like this piece too. And I was influenced when I saw this T-shirt, America Needs Nasty Women. And that's because Donald Trump was calling women nasty, who apparently who were assertive. And America did, because it went for Harriet Tubman, Susan B. Anthony, right? Nancy Pelosi. When you tend to speak up and you want to go to fight, you're a nasty woman. And it has been nasty women. And I like to look at myself as a proud man. I like the fact that she got her hands on her hips, and I'm not going anywhere. And I know I make you uncomfortable, but that's okay. I'm not going to sit here and be pretty and, you're going to sit and use me. We're going to make America and this world better. So I really, like this piece, because this piece here is called America Needs Nasty Women. And I'm going to look up the title, for the other one for you. Can we get the other slide? Okay, this one I did in 2008. And that was the year that Barack Obama first year he ran for president, and it was called Year of My Song. And the reason I did this piece, because it was I think was one of the most diverse years of candidates that I could remember. You know, we had Black people, Latino, woman running, running for president. And at the time I did this piece, Barack hadn't got elected, but I was rejoicing at the diversity, you know, particularly on the Democratic, side. It could have been on the Republican side. I didn't, I didn't care, but the diversity of candidates. And I began to really see hope that you come seeing, other people running, running for, for president. So this was my homage, to that moment. And it was to me, it was a very important moment. And it was important, I could, I started thinking, you can see the possibilities for our children everywhere in the future. And I still see, I still see possibilities, and I still, be, hopeful. But so they're singing. If you notice, the chicken is in the was that the it's not the trombone, but she's in the chicken's in the instrument in this piece. So that's it. And again, this is all about diversity. So, but I gotta look for the title of the other piece. Are there any other questions? Any more artwork? Okay, this is the melon shares. And again, as I told you about, stereotypes, in my land, the mammal land, if you see the one with melons, they share their stories about, stereotypes. And again, you see somebody from the past looking, in the windows, and you see, again, the chicken is there, and there's the, court gesture. But it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter to the women, because we're gonna, we're going to share our stories, and whether you think they're stereotypical or not, the women are still going to be powerful. And this is very important to me about women being powerful, because I felt my mother never felt powerful. And one thing about my family, most of my brothers were very good, not me, but most of my brothers were very good in math and science. And my father was good in math and science. And actually, he did 2 years at Milwaukee School of Engineering, and that's why he came to Milwaukee. So I thought my brothers got their smarts, just from my father. And then I talked to my aunt about my mother maybe about 10 years ago. And she told me that my mother wanted to be a scientist or a doctor. And I was shocked. I didn't know this about my mother. I never thought of her being a scientist or a a doctor. And a lot of times we don't think of, women. So, this is very, important to me, particularly to get that message about strong women. Are there any other questions? Are there any more slides? Yes. Okay. This piece I gave to my niece that's, 19. And I wanted to tell before I talk about this piece, I've been buying my niece a piece of art, artwork, and I will answer your question about the glue. I've been giving her a piece of artwork every year since she was 2, and she is an art collector. She's in college now, and she said when she finished college, she's going to collect art, and she buy art now. And this particular piece is called Girlfriend Night. Okay. And it's basically, we girlfriends are getting together, they, celebrating. And I had said that I made, references to other artists in the work. If you see, there's a figure, it looks like a clown with the hat. This is reference to an artist that I know named Michael Banks, who's a phenomenal, he's a very phenomenal artist. And again, I like a lot of, stuff, but this is about, us, us women getting together and enjoy ourselves. And there's also, there's always the stereotype about, about women, that we don't, get along, that, we jealous, we're this and that, and we're not. And there's two questions. Somebody asked me what type of glue I use. I use acrylic medium, tacky glue, and yes glue. And that's that's what I use. And depending on what I'm gluing on. And sometimes I'll use, I can't think of the other glue, but to move, the glue objects like bottle caps or metal. And I have some pieces I have used metal. I can't think of the glue right now. I'm having a senior moment, but I can't think of a glue. But those are the glues I usually use, and it depends. It depends on what it is. And there was a question, I forgot the other question that popped up. Oh, yeah, that's what it is. Thank you. Somebody get the glue. I think it was E60, E600. That's the other glue that I use for heavier objects.
Okay.
And I usually use the heavier objects when I'm, using it. It's usually on masonite when I use the heavier objects.
The other question is, do you use pictures of quilts or do you actually create the quilts out of paper?
I do both. And when I use pictures of, if I use a picture of a quilt, I alter it. So I do both. It all depends on the piece and what I'm working on. And this piece here is called Run, Harriet, Run, and that's a tribute to Harriet Tubman. And as you can see, she's holding a small chicken in her hand, and it's the fact that she was running to create freedom for the slaves. And if you see there's another young girl in the picture. She's holding the American flag, and that's again holding this country accountable to living up to the dream. And you see hands up there too, and they're like the ants. They too are the ancestors reaching out to us. And I do believe that. I do believe that our ancestors from the past, yes, the flowers do have significance. That's really, the flowers represent that your soul is blooming. And one of the things, for me to stop being an angry young woman, I had to allow, my soul to bloom. And I think that for this, I think that's something this country needs to, we need to face the truth, let go, and be open up to new possibilities of good. And actually I don't have many favorite pieces, but this was one of my favorite. Because generally I don't have favorites and people ask, but this is one of the few that is. So like your children, I don't have any, usually don't have a favorite child. Maybe you do. I know. I guess I could say I have a favorite. I only have one child. I only have one son. I have four grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren.
Oh.
And my great-grandchildren, all my grandchildren, my youngest grandson, he'll be 17 this year. My great-grandchildren are 11, and I got twin great-granddaughters, and they're actually good for using materials because they're funny as I don't know what. And I said they make great characters for my, for me to come up with stuff, because one of them is real bossy, and the other one, when her sister bossed her around, she looks at her like, or I don't care what you say, I'm gonna do what I want. And that's how I feel about my women. They don't care what other people say. I'm gonna do me. If you don't like it, too bad. But I don't know. Are there any other images?
Well, somebody asked about the
Oh,
clock in
that's the
that
one.
previous
Yeah,
one.
go back. It is here. That's one that.
Yeah, there was a question about the clock on the previous image that
Okay, the
Harriet
clock just
Tubman.
represents time, and for me, time is very important, and particularly now that I'm older. You know, when you're younger, you really don't think about it. In fact, when you're a child, it seems like it just drags, and then when you get grown, next thing you know, you're 70, like me. But time is very important, and what's important is what we do with our time while we're here on Earth and how we use it. This is called the Indigo Blue House, and that's referencing to the Gullah people, and blue, the blue dye, and this is the spiritual house. You see the young girl; she's throwing up the apples, and like she's casting away, she's casting away the sin, and she's walking with her elder or her mother, and they're walking with, with pride, and the quilts even influence my, the backgrounds. This is like a quilt wall in the house, but I like to call my, the quilts, quilt skies. And again, you see the young child there, right, raising the American flag again, because it's I really look at each generation. I see hope that they're going to push us forward to being the group of human beings that we should be. But that's, that's it. And again, she's holding, the mother is holding, the elders holding the scepter, and it's a welcome. And they're saying, welcome. They're welcoming freedom. They're welcoming, everybody. And so, that's it. Can we go to the other one?
Which,
There was another one with the bottle caps. It was a real long one.
I think, oh,
Well,
yeah,
we can talk about all these. Let's talk about all these. Oh, okay. That one.
that one. Okay.
Yeah. That's one where it's bottle cap.
I'm sorry, we can hardly hear you, Della.
Oh, okay, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Hold on.
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay,
Barbara, you
I
may
can-
have a
it's
problem.
fine.
Yeah.
Fine, I can hear you now.
Okay. This is one that I have a lot of found objects on. That bridge is made out of bottle caps and, and beads. And that one is called, "If You Don't Fight to Remove the Mask America Has Placed Upon You, We Will Never Harvest the Fruit of Freedom." And that's really about not even masks for Black people, but they put masks on, on all of us. Okay. The, we always have to wear, we all have to wear this mask of what we think that we should be. And if we focus on what we think we should be instead of focusing what we really should be, not what other people think. And she's just passing that, wisdom to, to again, that young girl. I think it's very important for elders to pass down, the wisdom. Each generation should pass down. I believe that we should pull and help each generation. So that's, that was it. And I even have beads in the background, glued on. And this one's on, like I said, it's on masonite. Can you zoom in so they can see the detail? Is that possible?
I don't think I can.
Oh, okay. Somebody just asked the question.
No, my Zoom is just working for changing.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. And if you see butterflies, they also mean transformation too. I'm guessing. Oh, somebody asked, am I using tweezers? No, I'm not. And I'm gonna tell you, sometimes it may take me a couple days to do work. And there's been some work. There's one piece that took me, not this one. This one may take me about 3 weeks to finish. There was one work that took me 15 years and another one took me 7 to finish. And the reason is I had to figure out the story, and I also had to sit and figure out, find the right objects, the right materials to tell, to tell the story, to tell the story. We can go to another collage if if you want. Okay, this one is called Sitting Here with My Sweet Melon Vines and Picasso Chicken. Picasso's one of my favorite artists. And I used to like to chill to Picasso, and I like watermelon. Actually, this is about me. And I like chilling with my art, chilling with my artwork, not my artwork, but other people's artwork. Do I work on more than one image at a time? Sometimes, but rarely. Usually I focus on the one image. Yeah. And there's found objects. Actually, that red bar that you see there, that's an old piece of wood that that I found. And I think it's very important that we relax and meditate. At least that's what I've learned in my in my old age. So she just, she's just sitting there, just grooving. Do I? Yes. Do I have any? Is the reason why you spelled melon melon? Yeah, because I like making up stuff. Yeah, because I wanted to be a writer, and I like making up, stuff. And I used to write a lot when I was a kid and when I was younger. And actually, I had a very active imagination. And my stories were a lot of times were unusual, that you probably wouldn't think a kid would write. I remember we had to write a story about Santa Claus, and everybody wrote about, typical Santa Claus. I wrote about my Santa Claus had a nervous breakdown in front of the store, in front of the kids. And then we had to write another story about a gambler. Everybody wrote about getting shot. Everybody wrote about him getting killed. And I wrote about the guy being a sore loser. And I know when I was at Milwaukee Area Technical College, I took a course in creative writing, and we had to do a graphic novel. And I hated the story. I and my friend hated the storyline because it was a beautiful actress. The guy was tall, dark, and handsome. And we plotted to ruin the story. And my friend, she thought she was ruining it by making the character Black. I totally ruined it. I shouldn't say this. I wrote a masturbation scene in the wind. I had the harem being, I had a deep, dark secret that somebody was going to explore, that was, that she was really born a man. Anyway, so by the time I finished reading it, my professor said, thank God somebody did something interesting. She said, this story was so boring till we got to my chapter, but I have a weird imagination. And this one's called Reaching for Salvation, because I actually believe, and this one is basically what the title says. And I actually think a lot of people, we are reaching for our salvation. We're reaching, we want something, right. And that was, that would keeps us going. And this is what this woman is doing. It's just simply reaching, for her salvation. And if you notice, the quilt has eyes. If you see eyes in my work, it's really God looking over us. And I did this in, 2020. And, and I kind of like, when I do collage, I kind of like think of it as a jigsaw puzzle. I think of my pieces as jigsaw puzzles, and I'm looking for puzzles, which is interesting because I hate doing jigsaw puzzles. But when I do my collages, that's what I think about, are, jigsaw puzzles. And then, you see I like putting chickens on wheels. And I do that because I figure it's my art and I can do what I want. And why chickens gotta have normal chicken feet? Sometimes I put normal chicken feet, but I like them being on wheels. And I said, this is my imaginary land. And but this is, is fine. And if you see like the sun, if you notice I have a lot of suns in my work, is because, the sun gives energy. And I like thinking of my women's being energetic, and from being 70, I need energy now. But, and I love trees. I love trees. Because when I was a child, I used to like playing in trees. And a lot of stuff is referenced, like I said, to me growing up as a child. And I like to think when I make the work, I think like a child. Even when I make my dolls, I pretend like I'm 9 years old again, because I want to get back to, that experience. Do I sell prints of my work? No, I don't. Only sell original. Sometimes I may make postcards, and mainly it's just my preference. I just want to, do the originals. I'm not opposed to anybody doing prints, but that's just, my preference. And who knows, I may change my mind some point in my life, but I just like doing the originals. And somebody had enough. Okay. And this one is called, How Much Is That Piece Reaching for a Salvation? That one sold. Okay. That one actually, can I be honest with you? Every piece you sold right now is sold. And actually, I'm actually in a good place. I actually got a waiting list for work. And this piece is called Take Thy True Sister, and You Would Know True Freedom. And this again is, she's handing this girl the chicken to let her know not to be caught up in this American fantasy and go take the truth, and freedom. Because you believe in this American fantasy or the so-called American, dream. And usually that is, for a lot of us women, at least back in the 50s, you have a house, white picket fence, you meet the man of your dreams. And don't get me wrong, I love men, but the same thing with men, we are all, we get caught up in this, what we think this ideal is, and I really think we need to, we learn the truth. We learn to appreciate ourselves. We learn to appreciate the value of others. And I believe everybody has value. And this young girl is telling this other young girl, take this truth and you really will know what America really is, what it's really supposed to be. There was another question that I didn't see. I don't think I answered, but if I didn't answer a question, just let me know. Again, you see the eye. Okay. There, and you see in the house, you see the eye, you see God. But we can go to the next one. And this one is called We Dare to Know Where Our Tale Begins. And again, she's talking. I think it's very important that we talk more, particularly intergenerational. We need to talk more to each other. And if we don't learn, we don't, we never know where our truth begins. And I really think it's talking. And somebody asked me what my prices are. Well, it depending on what you buy, you can get a card for anywhere from $10 to about $10,000. That's what my work is, is selling for. But I also make stuff like greeting cards, magnets, and really tiny collages, mainly because I want everyday people to be able to afford to buy, art. I get it, for some people, they say, it's too, it's, too much, money, but I make the greeting cards, and I, do like smaller stuff because I want everybody to buy it. And plus too, I think about my, my niece, she buys art and she, collects. I believe people should be able to collect it, any part. And I don't think, I mean, I love selling, the more, the expensive, more expensive stuff, even though that's cheap according to some parts of the art, art world. But I want average people to have my, work too. So I do, like I said, I make greeting cards, and sometimes I do, very, tiny pieces. Oh, I should tell you what, the clothesline is very significant too. Okay. Because I'm referencing my childhood. And I know some of the people that's out there, they remember how your mother used to hang the clothes on the clothesline. This was a really good memory about my childhood, and there weren't many. And I know I and my siblings used to run under the clothes. We weren't supposed to and play there, but that's that's it. That's it. And and that's what that represents. Are there any other questions? Okay, this one is called "My Rainbow Makes Me Dance," and because my rainbow do make me dance, because the rainbows represent this, the soul of self, realizing yourself, and it just make you just make you dance, and you don't need to hold an umbrella to protect you from the elements. She's rejoicing in herself. And I did this in 2019, and that's basically it. And I think about now, where I'm at now, and when I was a young woman. You said there's some black edges. Is there? But no, that's just the edge of of the table that it was on. So that's what that is. That's what that particular piece all about. Are there any more images? Because I'm, the most important thing.
Just one more.
Okay.
That's it.
Oh, okay. All right. Now this is something. This is a combination of my pastels and collages, and I'm only gonna do. I only have done 2 of these where it was collaboratively collage and painting, and I'm gonna be doing more. And this one is called "Me Despite What You See," that I'm watermelon free, and that's really despite what you see me as a Black woman. I'm not stereotypes. And actually, I was commissioned to do the, to do this for an exhibition that was here at the warehouse, and it's a self-portrait. And I'm going to be doing more of these. I did the second one, but both of them sold. I like the fact, because I love doing pastels, and I did this on wood, and I like the fact it's on found objects. I like the fact this is, it's assemblage, and it's doing all the things that I love on this piece. But and I like the fact that I got real big eyes. I like exaggerating my eyes. But but this is basically, saying this is me, and I don't care. And whatever you think about me, I know who I am. How did I say? I use an acrylic medium. The dowels. Okay, yeah, I'll tell you about the dowels. I started making the dowels when I was a little girl. All the dowels I had were white, and actually, my first African American dowels was given to me by my favorite aunt, Aunt Doretha. And at the time, I didn't know Aunt Doretha was a teenager. I thought she was grown like everybody else. And she gave me my first black dowel. I started doing the pillow dowels because I wanted to make dowels. And I don't know if anybody out there that grew up in the 50s and 60s, but back in the 50s, you could buy cereal, and you send the tops in, and maybe a quarter, and you can get something. Well, my mother, I forgot what cereal was. Anyway, she got me a pillow doll. It was like 25 cents. And I loved the doll, but the doll was blonde and blue-eyed. And so I decided to make dolls as reference to my childhood. And I, pretend like I'm 9 when I make them. And I write a little story, give them a name. I'm usually write a little poem about them. But it's, and which I enjoy making the dolls. But that I make the dolls as reference, going back to my childhood. I wanted to relate to something that was good from my childhood. And then I wanted to talk about these dolls being very independent women and, and girls. Are there any other questions out there? Hello?
Okay. I just was going to mention that I will be publishing the chat as well as the video. So if there's anything from this chat that you want to make reference to later, it will be available on the website in a few days.
Okay. And I want to thank you, for having me. And I want to thank, I want to also say that I think you're a great group. I really enjoyed looking at collages, and I like to look at how many different ways people do collages. So it's really wonderful. So thank all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fabulous
Yes.
presentation.
Thank you very
Wonderful.
much for sharing.
Thank you.
And
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for sharing.
Thank you.
No.
We all appreciate your work and your statements and everything you've said. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience, and look forward to seeing your work, more of it.
And the person who wanted the title of the piece, could you
Yes.
give them my email and tell them I'll email them the title?
Okay.
Okay.
So Della, again, thank you. If you should, Barbara,
Yeah.
where should we go from here? Should we?
Well, if there are any remaining questions, this is a good time to ask them. If not, oh, Wendy has a question. Okay.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm going to push the website again. We
Okay.
wouldn't have met Della if it wasn't for the CAA website. We wouldn't have
Yeah.
met Michael Church. We wouldn't have met so talented Miles. So please join us.
Exactly.
Facebook, you mean.
That was how I was able to get in touch with Della and the others as well. So thanks, Wendy, and thanks, Facebook.
Right.
And anyway, so I guess we can, if when we're ready to conclude the meeting, which is about now, we will still stay open a bit for after chat, or is there any questions about CAA before we say we end? Any other questions about Collage Artists of America, or anybody want to say anything? Okay, well then I guess we'll officially conclude our meeting, and then if you want to stay and chat a bit, if Barbara's willing and able.
No problem. We'll stay open as long as anybody wants to chat. I will stop the recording now if I can. Yeah, there it is.